At Rook and Finch, a velvet rope steakhouse in Brindleport, my sister slid the leather bill toward me like a verdict. "This table's not for foster beggars," she whispered, eyes on the gold foil total, 1900. I smiled, tapped my phone to the receipt, and said, "Perfect. I needed your signatures on record." They thought I'd swallow it. I had come to feed them the policy they wrote and the trap I built. My name is Rhea Kincaid, and at 32 years old, I've learned that the most dangerous predators don't hunt in the wild. They hunt in boardrooms and at establishments like Rook and Finch. On this particular Friday night, the air inside was thick with the scent of money, seared wagyu, and the slow, deliberate breathing of vintage Bordeaux decanting on black marble tables. The light was the color of old gold, buttery and low, catching the edges of crystal glasses and the flash of expensive watches. It was a carefully curated atmosphere designed to make powerful people feel at ease, to make their transactions, whether personal or professional, feel significant. I was seated at a corner booth, upholstered in dark green leather, wedged between my boss, Marcus Thorne, and my half-sister, Sable Kincaid. Marcus, the division head, was a man whose smiles never quite reached his eyes. He carried the easy, broad-shouldered confidence of someone who had never been told no in a meaningful way. He was laughing, a low rumble that was more about asserting presence than expressing humor, swirling a glass of wine that cost more than my first car's down payment. Across from him, Sable was a vision of curated perfection. Her blonde hair was styled in a way that looked effortlessly chic, but cost a fortune to maintain. Her dress was a sliver of black silk. Her jewelry minimal but fiercely expensive. She was the brand face of our strategy department, the golden child of Halvern Meridian, a company where our shared last name meant entirely different things. For her, it was a crown. For me, it was a brand, a permanent mark of charity. We were the only ones at the table. The pretense for this extravagant evening was a client celebration, a victory lap for a deal that Sable had supposedly closed. Yet, the client's chair was conspicuously empty. The sommelier, a man with the solemn demeanor of an undertaker, approached our table with a bottle that was not on any public menu. It was a Chateau Margaux, a ghost bottle reserved for the highest echelons of corporate spenders. He presented it to Marcus, who nodded with regal approval. As the sommelier began the delicate ritual of opening it, pouring a taste for Marcus to approve, Sable leaned in close to me. The scent of her perfume, something sharp and floral, was suffocating. Her voice was a venomous whisper, meant for my ears alone, a silken thread of cruelty woven through the ambient clatter of silver on china. "This table's not for foster beggars," she murmured, her lips barely moving. The words didn't just sting. They landed with the concussive force of a physical blow. It was her favorite weapon, the one she'd sharpened since my father, her stepfather, brought me into their polished home at the age of 9. The slur was designed to remind me of my place. A charity case, an outsider, a stray they'd taken in and could just as easily cast out. My entire body went rigid. A cold fire ignited in my stomach. But I've spent 2 decades perfecting the art of the placid exterior. I didn't flinch. I didn't even break eye contact with the wine glass in front of me. I simply watched the deep red liquid settle, its legs tracing slow, elegant paths down the crystal. I let her poison hang in the air between us, unheard by Marcus, who was too busy performing his connoisseurship for the sommelier. She wanted a reaction, a flinch, a tear, a stammered defense. I gave her nothing but the quiet, unnerving stillness of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The dinner progressed as a masterclass in corporate indulgence. Plates of glistening wagyu steak, so tender it barely required a knife, towers of seafood on ice, artfully constructed desserts involving spun sugar, gold leaf, and smoke trapped under glass domes. The conversation flowed around me, a torrent of inside jokes, industry gossip, and self-congratulation. I was a ghost at their feast. a necessary prop to legitimize the expense. They spoke of yachts and summer homes in the Hamptons, of deals closed on golf courses, a world so far removed from the one I was clawed from that it might as well have been another planet. I ate sparingly, my mind a cold, whirring engine of calculation. Every bite they took, every sip of that obscenely expensive wine, was another line of code in the program I was running. Finally, the moment arrived. The waiter, a young man with tired eyes who had been watching our table with a palpable sense of pity, placed the bill discreetly in a leather folio on the table. Marcus didn't even glance at it. He nudged it with a manicured finger towards Sable, who then slid it the final few inches across the polished wood until it stopped directly in front of me. The verdict, the gold-foiled numbers on the receipt seemed to glow in the dim light. 2,937. Team lead pays and files, Sable said, her voice now bright and performatively cheerful, loud enough for Marcus to hear. Family tradition? The phrase hung in the air, a perfect encapsulation of their worldview. I was the team lead for the compliance aspect of the project, a title they bestowed upon me to handle the paperwork they found tedious, but the insinuation was clear. The less-than-family member handles the bill. It was their tradition. This was it, the culmination of a year's worth of patient, meticulous observation. My phone was already resting on my lap, screen angled perfectly. With a slow, deliberate movement, I picked it up as if to check the time. My thumb swiped and tapped a sequence I had practiced until it was muscle memory. The microphone was now active, recording. "Of course," I said, my voice even. I picked up the leather folio and opened it. Then, I angled my phone slightly, the screen dark. "I'll just need your signatures for the expense report." I held out a pen. Marcus scrawled his name without a second thought, his signature an illegible power move. Sable signed below him, her name a series of elegant, self-satisfied loops. The ink was still wet, glistening under the lamplight. I held the phone steady. The camera's lens, disguised by the dark screen, captured a perfect, high-resolution image of the receipt, the total, and their two fresh signatures. Then, I looked up, first at Sable, then at Marcus, my expression one of professional diligence. "Just for the record," I asked, my voice clear and projecting just enough to be captured cleanly by the microphone. "This was a client dinner, correct? For the Vantage deal celebration?" Sable rolled her eyes, a gesture of profound boredom. "Obviously. Rhea, keep up." Her voice, dripping with condescension, was now a permanent, time-stamped piece of evidence. No client was present. The lie was recorded. I smiled faintly. Perfect. I reached into my purse and pulled out my wallet. Bypassing my personal cards and the standard-issue corporate Amex, I selected a specific card, one that looked identical to all the others but was anything but. It was my creation, a project I'd personally overseen with the finance tech team. It was a honey card, a fully functional corporate credit card, but one tied to a set of experimental, hyper-stringent compliance protocols. Specifically, it was flagged to trigger an automatic, high-priority audit workflow under Corporate Expense Policy 802.1 Scene, a clause I had personally drafted and embedded deep within the company's governance documents 6 months ago. It was a clause about substantiating high-value entertainment expenses where no client is physically present. It was a trap, baited with the company's own money, and they had just swum into it with gleeful abandon. As I handed the card to the waiter, my eyes drifted upwards, past the ornate light fixtures, to a small, dark dome in the ceiling. Camera 4B. I had checked the schematics of the restaurant's security system last week. It had a perfect, unobstructed view of our table, clear enough to see the number of people present and the exchange of the bill. It would corroborate everything. The waiter returned with the slip for me to add a tip and sign. As he placed it on the table, his eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. There was a flicker of understanding, of sympathy. He knew. He had seen this play out before. The powerful feasting while the quiet ones paid, in one way or another. I signed the slip, my own signature a neat, precise script. I gathered my things, placing the honey card back in its designated slot in my wallet. "Thank you for dinner, Marcus, Sable. It was very illuminating," I said. I stood up, smoothing down my blazer. Sable gave me a dismissive wave, already engrossed in a story with Marcus. They were basking in the afterglow of their free, decadent meal, confident in the system they had always known, a system that bent to their will. They saw me as the compliant functionary, the little foster girl who knew her place and would quietly file their fraudulent expense report. "I'll submit it tonight," I said with a small, tight smile, "so it gets processed first thing Monday." The trap was now closed. The location data from the transaction, the crystal-clear audio of Sable's slur and her subsequent lie, the high-resolution photo of the bill with their wet ink signatures, and the continuous video footage from the restaurant's own security camera. It was all captured. A perfect, undeniable, multi-layered package of evidence. I walked out of Rook and Finch and into the sharp, biting wind of the November night. The cold air was a relief, a shock to the system that cleared away the cloying heat of the restaurant. It whipped against my cheeks, feeling clean and real. I stood on the pavement for a moment, the city lights blurring around me. I pulled out my phone one last time. I navigated to my draft emails, a folder containing a single, carefully composed message. The recipients were already listed: the chief financial officer, the general counsel, and the anonymous tip line for the board's audit committee. The subject line was simple: urgent flag, potential violation of policy 802.1. Attached were the audio file and the image, both watermarked with invisible metadata detailing the exact time, GPS coordinates, and table number. My thumb hovered over the send button. This wasn't just about a $2,900 dinner. It was about every whispered insult, every dismissive glance, every time I was made to feel like I was living on borrowed time in a world I didn't belong to. It was about the systemic rot of a company that preached family but practiced feudalism. Sable's words were the spark. But I had built the pyre long ago. I pressed send. The screen confirmed the action with a quiet swoosh. The auto-detonator was triggered. I felt a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying begin to lift from my shoulders. I took a deep breath of the cold night air and started walking towards the subway, leaving the golden glow of Rook and Finch behind me. The reckoning had begun. The name Kincaid was stamped onto my life when I was 9 years old. I remember standing in the marble-floored entryway of Alistair Kincaid's home, a cavernous space that smelled of lemon polish and old money. My entire life was packed into a single, worn duffel bag at my feet. Alistair, a man whose kindness felt as vast and impersonal as the house itself, knelt down and told me this was my home now. It was a transaction of goodwill, an act of benevolence that would define my existence within his orbit. Years later, he would marry a widow with a daughter my age, a whip-smart, silver-tongued girl named Sable. That was when the house, and the name, became contested territory. Alistair was my father in name, but he was Sable's in spirit. I was a project. She was his legacy. That same dynamic plays out every single day in the polished steel and glass lobby of Halvern Meridian. Here, Sable Kincaid is not just an employee. She is royalty in waiting. As the brand face of the Strategic Partnerships Division, she is the one front and center at every product launch, her image perfectly calibrated for the cover of industry magazines. She possesses an effortless charisma born from a life devoid of consequence. Executives laugh louder at her jokes. Her ideas are visionary, and her career path is a smooth, upward trajectory, paved by the influence of a father who sits on the boards of 3 of our biggest clients. She moves through the corporate world like a galleon under full sail, magnificent and utterly unaware of the currents that carry her. I chose a different path. While Sable was learning to command a room, I was learning to read one. I gravitated towards the parts of the business no one else wanted, the dense labyrinth of corporate governance, the arcane language of regulatory compliance, the fine print at the bottom of a 1,000-page contract. I chose the engine room over the captain's deck, There is a unique and quiet power in understanding the rules of a system better than anyone else, especially when that system is run by people who believe the rules don't apply to them. I became an expert in the architecture of the company, its bylaws, its ethics clauses, its financial controls. I knew where every load-bearing wall was, and I knew where to find the hairline fractures. To Sable and her circle, I am the walking policy. It's a nickname she uses with a condescending smirk, usually in meetings when I raise a point about protocol or due diligence. Let's not get bogged down in the weeds. Rhea, she'll say, a flick of her wrist dismissing my concern. We're talking about vision here. Behind my back, to her friends and Marcus, I remain the charity case. The two terms are two sides of the same coin. One to diminish my professional contribution, the other to diminish my personal worth. For years, I absorbed these slights. I learned to make my silence a tool. It was not the silence of submission, but the silence of observation. Every time she called me the walking policy, I would make a mental note of the context, the project, the expense code attached to the meeting. My silence was a ledger, and I was meticulously recording every debt. The first entry in that ledger was made just over a year ago. It was a receipt from a restaurant not unlike Rook and Finch, submitted by Marcus, but with Sable's name in the notes section. The total was over $4,000 for 4 people. The justification: Client Strategy Dinner, APEC Holdings. I knew for a fact the APEC Holdings deal had been signed and finalized 2 weeks prior, and their team was based in Singapore. A quick, discreet check of corporate travel logs and building access records confirmed it. No one from APEC was even in the country. It was a lie, but a lazy, arrogant one. They felt so secure they didn't even bother to make it plausible. That was the first fracture I saw. From that day on, I started a quiet, after-hours audit of my own. I wrote a simple script to flag expense reports from their department that contained certain keywords: celebration, strategy, prospecting. Combined with high-end restaurant names and unusually large tips, the results were staggering. A pattern emerged, a consistent rhythm of fraud hidden in plain sight. Dozens of client dinners with no clients, bottles of rare wine and whiskey expensed as meeting supplies, lavish team celebrations for teams that consisted only of Marcus and Sable. It was a shadow budget, a slush fund financed by the company to subsidize their opulent lifestyle, all under the guise of doing business. I began archiving the evidence on an encrypted personal drive. Each receipt was a piece of the mosaic I was building. A $700 charge for 2 at a Michelin-starred restaurant, justified as initial contact with potential partner, with no partner name listed, an $1,800 bill from a private club, annotated simply as morale event. The most damning ones were those, like Friday's dinner, that listed a specific client who wasn't there. Each one was signed off by Marcus, a man who believed his authority was a shield against accountability. 6 months ago, I made my move. I used my position in compliance to propose a new efficiency update to the expense reporting software. I presented it to the CFO's office as a way to proactively manage documentation and reduce end-of-quarter audit strain. My proposal included the implementation of an automated rule. Any entertainment or travel expense over $500 submitted without a specific non-employee attendee's name entered into the guest field would be automatically flagged. If that expense also carried the signature of a division-level manager or higher, the flag would escalate directly to a priority review queue accessible only by the CFO and the head of the audit committee, bypassing the normal managerial approval chain entirely. I was the walking policy, after all. They praised my diligence and approved the update without a second thought. I had officially laid the track and set the switch. All I needed was for the train to come through. The $2,900 dinner at Rook and Finch wasn't the first time they had stolen from the company. By my calculation, it was at least the 6th major instance in the last quarter alone. But it was the first time since my new rule went live, and it was the first time I was there to be their witness, their documentarian. It was the first time they would use my honey card. Most importantly, it was the first time their fraud would be accompanied by an audio file of them defining me by my origins. a clear and unambiguous violation of the company's harassment and discrimination policy. They misunderstood my ambition. They thought I wanted what Sable had: the spotlight, the easy praise, the corner office with the view. I've never wanted their money or their status. I learned a long time ago, in that big, empty house, that what people like them value is brittle. What I want is something far more fundamental. I want proof. I want unassailable, documented proof that the people who run this company, who speak about merit and family while practicing nepotism and exclusion, are unworthy of the power they wield. I don't want to take their money. I want to strip away the illusion that they ever deserved it in the first place. The check they pushed across the table at me wasn't an insult to be swallowed. It was the final exhibit in my case against them, and it was going to be the last one they ever filed. In chess, you do not win by attacking wildly. You win by controlling the board. You place your pawns to limit your opponent's options, position your knights to threaten key squares, and castle your king, not out of fear, but to connect your rooks. The most satisfying checkmate is not a sudden, brilliant sacrifice. It is the quiet, inevitable conclusion of a game that was decided 10 moves prior. For the last year, I have been placing my pieces. Sable and Marcus believed they were playing their own game, one of influence and entitlement, but they were playing on my board, following my rules. The entire trap was built from the materials they gave me: their arrogance, their laziness, and their profound, systemic corruption. My first move was creating the honey card. In cybersecurity, a honeypot is a decoy system set up to attract and detect attackers. My honey card was a decoy expense account. On the surface, it was a standard-issue Halvern Meridian corporate Amex, identical to the one in Marcus's wallet, but in the back end, it was my private experiment. I created it under the umbrella of a financial integrity stress test, a pilot program I myself proposed, and which the CFO, who loves proactive buzzwords, approved without a second glance. This card was hard-coded with 2 unique triggers. The first was its direct link to Rule 802.17. Any transaction on this card, regardless of amount, bypassed the standard managerial approval loop. Marcus would never even see the expense report I filed. It would not go to his desk for a rubber-stamped signature. It was routed directly to a secure digital locker accessible only by the General Counsel and the independent chair of the Audit Committee. The second trigger was a unique code I embedded in the card's metadata: Flag FAM. I had created this risk category 6 months ago during a governance review. I argued, in a very dry and boring presentation, that any spending involving or authorized by individuals with a direct familial relationship to C-suite executives constituted a heightened conflict of interest risk. The board, terrified of SEC scrutiny, agreed. Flag FAM was born. This meant that any expense I filed, authorized by Marcus, for the benefit of Sable, was already primed for the highest level of investigation. Next, I perfected the software trap. My automated rule for Rule 802.17 was more than just a flag. It was an interactive interrogation. When an expense was filed with the keyword client, but the guest field was empty, my macro didn't just reject it, it initiated a pop-up query. Please confirm, name of client participants? The user could not proceed without typing an answer. This was critical. It forced the filer to either admit the fraud, none, or to commit a documented, prosecutable lie. Client was present, which camera footage would disprove. When I filed the report from Rook and Finch and typed none present in response to that automated query, I was not just filing an expense, I was signing their confession. But digital evidence can be disputed. I needed the physical world to align with my data. I needed an undeniable, real-world nexus. That nexus was Rook and Finch. Table 4B. Sable and Marcus love Rook and Finch. It's their stage. I knew they would choose it. A week before the dinner, I took a junior analyst from my team there for a mentorship lunch. I called ahead and requested a specific booth. Table 4B. I claimed it was for a sensitive performance review, and required privacy. The maitre d', accustomed to such requests, marked it in his book. From that booth, I spent an hour mapping the restaurant's security. I identified the small black dome on the ceiling, camera 4B. Its angle was perfect. It captured the entire table, the faces of the occupants, and had a clear top-down view of the table surface where the bill would be placed. When Sable, predictably, suggested Rook and Finch for their celebration, I simply called the restaurant and, using the name of Marcus's executive assistant, requested Mr. Thorne's preferred booth, 4B. They were happy to oblige a high-spending regular. The wine was the masterstroke. I couldn't leave their indulgence to chance. I needed to tag a specific, high-value corporate asset and trace its path from the restaurant to their personal possession. Through my work in vendor compliance, I had a professional relationship with Halvern's primary wine and spirit supplier. 3 weeks ago, I contacted my representative there under the guise of an asset and inventory audit. I explained that we were testing our ability to track high-value, non-tangible gifts. I requested the serial number for a specific, off-menu bottle of Chateau Margaux. The supplier, happy to assist a major client's compliance department, provided it. I then had a quiet word with the sommelier at Rook and Finch, a man I had tipped extravagantly at my mentorship lunch. I told him Halvern Meridian was considering this specific bottle for our top-tier client gifts and that my boss, Marcus Thorne, would be in on Friday. I suggested that if he happened to acquire a bottle and suggested it to Mr. Thorne as a rare find, it would be beneficial. The sommelier, seeing a $2,000 sale and a massive tip in his future, was only too eager to play his part. But how to track the bottle after it left the table? They were too sloppy to finish it. I knew they would take it. This required a Trojan horse. I arrived at the dinner with a large, opulent gift bag. Inside was a ridiculously expensive, velvet-lined, custom-engraved wooden wine box. The engraving was the logo of the client we were supposedly celebrating. When the dinner ended and the half-full bottle of Margaux sat on the table, I gestured to the gift bag. "This was for the client," I said, my voice full of mild disappointment. What a shame they couldn't make it. Sable, whose greed always overshadowed her suspicion, took the bait instantly. "We can't let that go to waste. Rhea, that bottle is divine, and that box is gorgeous. I'll take them both back. I can review them for future client gift potential." "Of course," I said, as she slid the bottle into the velvet lining. She had no idea she was also securing the small, quarter-sized AirTag I had sewn into the lining of the box earlier that day. I had my asset, and now I had my tracker. I would have a perfect time-stamped map of a $2,000 corporate asset traveling from the restaurant directly to the refrigerated cellar in Sable's Halcyon Key condominium. The evidence package was almost complete. The photo I took of the bill with their signatures needed to be ironclad. A simple phone picture could be dismissed as doctored. I used a specialized compliance app, one designed for legal chain of custody. The moment I snapped the picture, the app embedded an invisible cryptographic watermark into the image file. This watermark was immutable. It contained the exact time to the nanosecond, the precise GPS coordinates of Rook and Finch, and the metadata of my phone. The image was now a legally verifiable document. With the financial and physical traps set, I moved to the human element. This could not just be a story of financial fraud. It had to be a story of character. I needed to weaponize their cruelty. A month ago, I scheduled an informal ideation session with the new head of HR ethics. I framed it as a proactive compliance query. "I'm updating our anti-harassment training modules," I explained, scrolling through a dummy presentation. "I see we have robust language for protected classes like race, gender, and religion, but I have a hypothetical. What if the harassment is based on someone's origin story to, say, their status as an adopted individual or having been in the foster care system?" The HR officer, eager to prove her progressive bona fides, sat up. "That is an excellent point. Rhea, derogatory language based on familial status or personal origin, including adoption, absolutely constitutes a hostile work environment. It's a zero-tolerance violation. if you ever heard anything like that. It would trigger an immediate, top-down investigation. That's reassuring, I'd said. Let's make sure that's explicit in the next training deck. I had primed her. I had given her the exact search parameters. When my evidence package landed on her desk, complete with a crystal-clear audio file, the phrase, "Foster beggars," wouldn't just be an insult, it would be the pre-verified trigger for the corporate equivalent of a nuclear launch. Finally, I built their coffin. I anticipated their defense. It was a mistake. I didn't know the policy. Everyone does it. So, I built the 802.17 FAQ page. It was a simple, stark page on the company intranet, which I, as a compliance analyst, had the credentials to create. I populated it with their exact, predictable excuses, phrased as questions. Q. What if a client confirms verbally but isn't at the dinner? A. Policy 802.19 requires a digital email confirmation from the client within 24 hours of the expense, which must be attached to the report. Verbal confirmation is insufficient for high-value entertainment. Q. What if the dinner is an internal team celebration? A. Internal celebrations are subject to a different budget code and require pre-approval from finance. Expensing an internal celebration as client entertainment is a direct violation of financial policy and may be considered fraudulent. 2 weeks ago, I pushed an update to the compliance module that made reviewing this specific FAQ page a mandatory annual recertification for all managers at the director level and above. The system logs, which I now possess, show that both Marcus Thorne and Sable Kincaid clicked "I have read and understood" on October 8th. They had certified, with their own digital signatures, that they knew the rules. All the pieces were on the board: the honey card, the rerouted workflow, the camera-friendly table, the tagged bottle, the watermarked photo, the primed HR department, and the FAQ page that nullified their only defense. I wasn't waiting for them to make a mistake. I had built a machine, and I was simply waiting for them to feed it. I just needed one Moilua, one spark to ignite the entire complex mechanism, and that Friday night, when Sable leaned in, her voice dripping with the casual cruelty of the truly privileged, she provided it. This table's not for foster beggars. She thought she was delivering an insult. She was actually arming the bomb. I stood under the harsh fluorescent lights of my own kitchen, the city's pulse a distant hum 9 floors below. The chill of the November night was still on my skin, but inside, I was perfectly calm. I placed my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door. I took off my blazer, hung it, and walked to my home terminal. The adrenaline from the restaurant had faded, replaced by the cold, clean focus of an analyst about to execute a final line of code. I sat down. The system was waiting. 9:14 p.m. I logged into the Halvern Meridian financial portal. The interface was clunky, old-fashioned, a digital relic of a system built on trust and loopholes. My trust was in data. I created a new expense report. Expense type: client entertainment. Vendor: Rook and Finch. Justification: client win dinner. Vantage deal amount: $2,900.37. I clicked Attach receipt. I uploaded the file, not a blurry phone picture, but the crisp, forensically watermarked image from my compliance app. The 2 signatures, Marcus's arrogant scrawl and Sable's elegant loop, were perfectly clear. I clicked Submit. As designed, the system did not complete the submission. A sterile blue pop-up box filled the center of my screen. It was my own creation. The macro I'd written. System query: expense filed under client entertainment with no client name detected in guest field. Please confirm. Name of client participants? My fingers hovered over the keys. This was the digital crossroads. This was the lie or the truth. I typed 3 words, none present. I hit confirm. The screen flashed. Submission received. ECID 904B. This report contains items flagged under Policy 802.19. Routed for non-standard review, the process was irreversible. The auto-detonator was live. 9:16 p.m. The first detonation. A notification appeared in the corner of my monitor, an email routed not to my corporate account, but to a private, encrypted inbox I used to monitor my own systems. From finsysalert@halvernmeridian.com. Subject, trigger, 802.16. Violation, ECID 904 B. Body, expense ID, 904B, filed by R. Kincaid, has triggered Rule 802.17, high-value entertainment, no client substantiation, per protocol. This filing and all attached documentation have been auto-forwarded to the secure review portals of A. Davies, CFO, M. Liu, General Counsel, R. Holloway, Audit Chair. The first tumbler clicked. The report had successfully bypassed Marcus and Sable entirely. It was now in the hands of the three most powerful legal and financial figures in the company. 9:17 p.m. The second detonation. This one I triggered myself. My submission confirmation was the green light for a separate, pre-drafted email I had scheduled. It was addressed to the new head of HR ethics, the one I had so carefully primed. From R. Kincaid, Compliance. Subject, formal complaint. Hostile work environment and code of conduct violation. Event, 2025. 10:19. Body. Please find attached a formal complaint regarding a violation of the Halvern Meridian Code of Conduct, specifically pertaining to harassment based on familial status and personal origin. The incident occurred at a corporate dinner tonight. I attached 2 files. The first was RKHWE violation, MP3, the crystal clear audio file captured by my phone. The second was RKHWE transcript, PDF, an AI-generated transcript where one line was already highlighted in yellow. S. Kincaid, 204105. This table's not for foster beggars. HR now had the financial fraud and the character assassination, linked and time-stamped. 9:20 p.m. The third detonation, the wine. The moment my honey card was charged at Rook and Finch, the itemized SKU for the Chateau Margaux was captured. A script I'd written instantly queried the inventory API of our wine supplier. The confirmation email was already waiting for me in my vendor audit folder. From supplier API at vintageimporters.com. Subject, Audit Query. Serial, 88BG45. Body, status, confirmed, serial, 88BG45. Chateau Margaux was allocated to Halvern Meridian corporate account, HalvCorp 01, on 2025 10. Inventory logs show no subsequent withdrawal or allocation for any client gift or client-facing event. The bottle wasn't a client expense. It was an internal asset, a piece of company property, and it was about to be stolen. 9:22 p.m. The final piece of physical proof. I opened the Find My app on my laptop, logged into the dummy Apple ID I had created for this single purpose. On the map, a small green dot, labeled Client Gift Box, was on the move. I watched it trace a path from the downtown grid of Rook and Finch onto the West Side Highway, and then north. It moved with the steady pace of a car, pinging off the iPhones of other drivers. After 10 minutes, it stopped. It settled on a location I knew well, Halcyon Key, one of the most expensive waterfront apartment buildings in the city. The building where Sable lived, the stolen corporate asset, serial number 88BG45, was now inside her private residence. I had the signatures, I had the audio, I had the financial violation, I had the inventory proof, and now I had the GPS location of the stolen goods. I sat back, letting the quiet of my apartment settle around me. The system was now moving on its own. All I had to do was wait for the targets to realize the trap had closed. It didn't take long. 9:28 p.m. My personal phone, the one Sable had the number for. lit up on the desk beside me. A text message. Sable. Delete that dinner. You know how this works. Marcus is busy. Just file it under the Q4 morale budget or something. He'll approve it Monday. I read the message once, then a second time. The casual arrogance, the assumption of my compliance, the complete, blissful ignorance of the firestorm that was already consuming her. She was still giving orders to the Foster beggar. She still believed how this works meant she was in charge. I felt nothing. No anger, no triumph. Just the cold, clean satisfaction of a problem being solved. I tapped on my phone. I had a library of pre-written text templates for just such an occasion. I selected Response Template 4B, Record Alteration Request. My reply was sent 2 seconds later, per company policy. I cannot alter or delete submitted expense records post-filing. All submissions are final and subject to audit. I watched the delivered receipt turn to read. I could almost feel the jolt of confusion on the other end, the spike of irritation. She would be texting Marcus now. What's wrong with your compliance girl? They would be realizing, for the first time, that the door they had always used was locked. 9:35 p.m., the final, definitive strike. My corporate email, the one monitored by an executive-level filter, chimed. It was an email from Robert Holloway, the audit chair. Holloway was a legend, a former SEC enforcement director who had been brought onto the board to be its iron fist. He did not issue warnings. He issued sentences. It was a calendar invitation for 8 a.m. Monday. Subject: urgent. Review of expense ID 904B. Attendees: A. Davies, CFO, M. Liu, General Counsel, J. Lee, Head of HR Ethics, R. Kincaid, Compliance. Marcus Thorne and Sable Kincaid were not on the list. The body of the invitation was brutally concise. Ms. Kincaid, we are convening an emergency session of the Ethics and Audit Subcommittee. Be prepared to present all documentation related to this filing. Please bring all relevant video, audio, and locator data in your possession. Do not discuss this meeting with your direct line management. R.H. Video, audio, and locator data. He already knew what I had. The system had worked perfectly. I closed the email. Each notification over the last 21 minutes had been a sound, sharp and distinct. The click of the system flagging the expense, the swoosh of the HR complaint, the ping of the inventory confirmation, the beep of the AirTag settling, the vibration of Sable's panicked text, the chiming of the final, fatal meeting invitation. It was the sound of a complex machine locking into place, the sound of a hammer being pulled back. Click by click. Sable's voice in the restaurant. This table's not for Foster beggars. Wasn't just an insult. It was the pressure on the trigger. The bullet was their own arrogance. But the gun was the policy I built, and I had just watched it fire a perfect shot, straight through the heart of their corrupt, little kingdom. We're family. That's the mantra of Halvern Meridian. It's etched into the frosted glass of the lobby, printed on the glossy onboarding pamphlets, and repeated by executives in all-hands meetings. It's a beautiful lie. In the Halvern Meridian family, like in the one I grew up in. Family is a hierarchy. It means the powerful write the rules and the weak pay the bills. It means some are born with a key to the kingdom, and others are expected to be grateful for a place by the door. My father, Alistair Kincaid, once sat me down in his cavernous study, the air thick with the smell of leather and his disappointment. I was 15 and had bested Sable on a calculus exam. She had cried. He had consoled. Then he had called for me. "Rhea," he said, his voice gentle but firm, a velvet glove on an iron hand. "You must remember that you are here because of our kindness. Sable is here by right. I am here by kindness." It was his way of telling me not to shine too brightly, lest I cast a shadow on the true heir. But he was wrong. I wasn't at his table because of kindness. I was there because I was a survivor, and I wasn't at Halvern Meridian because of his name. I was here because of my competence. That single conversation defined the two separate worlds we inhabited. Sable learned to love the photograph, the posed shot in a glass-walled boardroom, the magazine feature, the perfect image of success. I learned to love the metadata, the hidden data that tells the true story, the time a file was created, the GPS coordinates embedded in an image, the revision history of a document. Sable curated her public-facing image. I curated the unshakable truth that lay beneath it. The emergency meeting was not held in a glass-walled boardroom. It was in the summit room on the 40th floor, a space reserved for crises. It had no windows. The walls were paneled in dark, sound-absorbing wood. The only light came from a recessed fixture directly above the granite slab of a table. It was a room designed for interrogations, not conversations. When I walked in, Robert Holloway, the audit chair, was already there, along with the CFO and general counsel. They nodded at me, their faces grim. They had seen the executive summary. Marcus and Sable were brought in 5 minutes later. They walked in with the breezy confidence of people who believed they were attending a misunderstanding. Marcus was smiling, ready to smooth things over. Sable looked annoyed, as if this were an inconvenient disruption to her important day. "All right, Bob," Marcus started, addressing Holloway with a familiarity that was a grievous miscalculation. "I think there's been some overzealous flagging from the new system. Rhea, you should have just come to me. We could have sorted this out." Holloway didn't respond. He simply gestured to the large screen at the end of the room. "Mr. Thorne, the expense was filed as client win dinner. Can you confirm who the client was?" Here it came, the first predictable lie. "Of course," Marcus said smoothly. "It was John from Vantage. He confirmed verbally earlier in the day but had a last-minute family issue. We proceeded with the dinner to strategize the next phase. It's about maintaining momentum." I didn't say a word. I just tapped a key on my laptop, which was connected to the room's display. The screen changed. It now showed a digital log. Rook and Finch, Guest Management System Reservation. Thorne, M. Party of 3. Check-in log, 2025. 10-19. 1958. Thorne, Marcus, 1959. Kincaid, Sable, 2001. Kincaid, Rhea guest. Status, no external kayak guests. Logged. For table 4B, the general counsel, a woman who missed nothing, pointed her pen at the screen. "So, the restaurant system, which logs everyone who enters, shows no one else checked in for your table?" Marcus's smile faltered. "It's a busy place. They must have missed him." I tapped another key. The screen now showed the Vantage corporate travel calendar, which I had access to through our partner portal. A bright red block sat over the entire week. Event: Vantage Global Team On-Site, London office. Attendance: mandatory for all VPs and directors. John was a VP. He hadn't been on the continent. Silence descended. Sable, seeing Marcus flounder, jumped in with the second predictable defense: trivialization. "For goodness sake, this is insane," she said, her voice a sharp, impatient laugh. "We're talking about a dinner, a bottle of wine. Are we really wasting the audit chair's time with this? Come on, it's just wine." "It is never just wine," Holloway said, his voice flat and cold. I brought up the next slide. It wasn't a log or a calendar. It was a simple, brutal table. Expense ID 904B, compliance violations. 1. Policy 802.17. High-value entertainment without client substantiation. Mandatory recertification, read and understood. M. Thorne, 2025. 1008 S. Kincaid, 2025. 1008. 2. Policy 401.5. Misappropriation of corporate assets. Asset, Chateau Margaux, SN 88 BWG 45. Current location, Halcyon Key Residences. 3. Policy 211.2. Conflict of interest, personal benefit. Transaction authorized by direct manager for the benefit of a direct family relation. 4. Policy 3098, gift declaration. Asset valued over $250 not declared as personal gift. Each policy number was a hyperlink. The general counsel leaned forward, reading. Sable's face had gone pale. They weren't being questioned about a dinner. They were being shown a multi-count indictment. "This is a setup," Sable whispered, her voice losing its edge. I let her accusation hang in the silent room for a moment before I moved to the final exhibit. I cued the image file, the high-resolution, watermarked photo of the $2,900 receipt filled the screen. Their signatures were huge, stark against the white paper. "The signatures confirm your authorization of the expense," I said, my voice even and low. It was the first time I had spoken directly to them. Marcus squinted at the screen. "It's just a receipt, Rhea." "Look closer," Holloway commanded. I used the trackpad to zoom in on the top right corner of the image. There, reflected in the curved, polished silver of a water pitcher next to the bill, was a distorted but unmistakable image. You could see the dark dome of camera 4B on the ceiling, and just below it, you could see the face of Sable, head tilted, smiling condescendingly at me as she slid the bill across the table. The metadata, time-stamped and geolocated, was visible in a transparent overlay at the bottom of the screen. A small, sharp intake of breath came from the CFO. It was over. A signed confession with photographic evidence of the crime scene. But I wasn't finished. This wasn't about one night. It was about the entire rotten structure. "This was not an isolated incident," I said, and brought up the last document. It was a simple log from my private audit script. Flagged expense pattern. Thorne Kincaid, 90-day period. 1/2025/07/22. The Embers Steakhouse. $1,850.15. Justification. Client prospecting. No client named. 2/2025/08/10. Oceanus Prime. $2,419.50. Justification. Client strategy. Apex. Client in Tokyo. 3/2025/08/29. Rook and Finch. $2,110. Justification. Team celebration. Team of 2. 4/2025/09/18. The Embers Steakhouse. $2,220.75. Justification. Client relations. No client named. 5/2025/10/06. Private Club Gnome. $5,800. Justification. Morley Event. M. Thorne. S. Kincaid. 90-day total. $11,400.40. The room was utterly still. Marcus Thorne stared at the screen, his face ashen. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire world dissolve. Sable was looking at me, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. The mask was gone. The brand face had cracked, and underneath was just the ugly, spitting rage of a queen who had been dethroned by a pawn. I didn't meet her gaze. I looked at the screen, at the clean, undeniable data. I didn't need to raise my voice, or make accusations, or deliver a triumphant speech. The documents were doing all the talking. They spoke of a pattern of theft, of arrogance, of a belief that the rules were for other people. They spoke of a so-called family that sustained its lavish lifestyle on the back of fraudulent invoices and other people's money. I had brought the receipts, all of them. In the end, it was so simple. The truth doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to scream and rage. It just needs a signature. And I had theirs, an eye on everything. The room's ventilation system was the loudest thing I could hear, a low mechanical hum against the sudden, suffocating silence. The $11,400 list of their past dinners hung on the screen, an epitaph for their careers. Marcus was staring at the granite table, his reflection a pale, distorted mask. Sable's hatred was a physical force, a wave of heat rolling across the table. But they were not the only other Kincaid in the room. In the corner, set slightly back from the main table, sat Alistair Kincaid, my father, Sable's stepfather. He had been summoned by the audit chair, a courtesy given his name and influence, and he had sat through the entire financial execution in stunned, Imperious silence. Now, his face was a tight knot of confusion and fury. The light from the ceiling fixture didn't quite reach him, leaving his bespoke suit in shadow, but I could see the glint of his eyes. He was looking at me, not as a daughter, but as a problem he had failed to manage. The CFO, seeing the financial case closed, cleared his throat and nodded to the head of HR ethics, a woman named Lee. That concludes the 802.17 review. Jess, the second item on the agenda. The tone of the room shifted. It became colder, sharper, more personal. The glass walls of the Summit boardroom, which looked out over the entire city, were not windows, they were mirrors. In their dark, polished surfaces, everyone in the room was reduced to a fragile, translucent reflection, superimposed over the void. My own heart was a tight drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady on my laptop. "Thank you," Jess Lee said. She was a calm woman, not prone to theatrics. "Alongside the financial violations, we are here about a formal harassment complaint filed by Ms. Kincaid." Marcus snapped his head up. "What? Harassment? That's ridiculous. I've never—" "The complaint is not against you, Mr. Thorne," Jess said, her eyes on Sable. "It is a hostile work environment complaint, based on derogatory language pertaining to familial status and personal origin." Alistair Kincaid stiffened. This was his territory. This was about family. Sable actually laughed. A short, sharp, ugly sound. "Oh, for God's sake, are you kidding me? This is what this is all about? She's upset I hurt her feelings? This is a pathetic, desperate—" "We have the audio," Jess said, cutting her off. She pressed a key on her own laptop. My voice, clear and professional, filled the room. "Audio. Just for the record, this was a client dinner, correct?" Then, Sable's, dripping with condescension. "Audio. Obviously, Rhea, keep up." And then, the quiet, venomous whisper from earlier, captured by the microphone as I'd first picked up my phone. "Audio. This table's not for foster beggars." The words echoed in the soundproofed room. "Foster beggars." The general counsel flinched. The CFO closed his eyes. Robert Holloway, the audit chair, just stared at Sable, his expression unreadable. Alistair Kincaid looked like he had been slapped. The blood drained from his face, leaving a waxy, gray pallor. Marcus, desperate, tried to diffuse it. "It was a joke," he said, his voice cracking. "A bad joke, tasteless, but it was just a phrase, a moment of poor judgment." The general counsel, Myra Liu, leaned forward. Her voice was soft, but it cut through his defense like a scalpel. "Mr. Thorne, hostile environment is not a joke. It is a legal definition. And that single phrase, used by a superior against a subordinate, establishes a textbook case. It demonstrates a pattern of bias that now taints every professional interaction, including the one that led to this 11,400 fraud." Sable was shaking, her composure finally shattered. "She's a liar. She trapped me. She's been planning this, the little snake, probably for years. She's a foster fraud, climbing with pity and—" "Ms. Kincaid," Holloway interrupted, his voice a gavel. He turned his gaze to me. It was not kind. It was calculating. "A question. Ms. Kincaid," he said to me. "This data is comprehensive. The pattern of fraud, the personal grievance. Why did you not escalate this earlier? Why wait for this single, dramatic event?" The room turned to me. This was the real test. Was I a victim, or was I an operator? I took a breath. I met his gaze. "Because, Mr. Holloway, escalating a suspicion, or a single offense, would have resulted in spin. It would have been dismissed as a family matter or a personal dispute. They would have paid the money back, taken a slap on the wrist, and my position would have become untenable." I gestured to the screen, to the reams of data. "I didn't escalate until I had an undeniable, multi-layered case that was not just about money, but about character. I gathered proof that stopped spin, proof that could not be buried by HR, minimized by a manager, or overridden by a name. I waited until the evidence was so complete that the only possible outcome was accountability. My eyes found Alistair Kincaid's in the shadows. His reflection in the glass looked back at him, a ghost of the powerful man who had entered the room. He looked older, not by 10 years, but by a lifetime. The kindness he had so prized, the benevolence he had used as a shield and a weapon, was useless here. He saw, finally, what he had created. Not a grateful, adopted project, but a mirror of his own family's corruption. Sable saw the look on his face. She saw her protection evaporating. She lunged, her voice a raw scream. "She is a fraud! She set me up! You can't believe this! This charity case!" I didn't respond to her. I simply reached into my leather satchel and pulled out a single, laminated document. I slid it across the polished granite table. It stopped directly in front of Alistair, Holloway, and the General Counsel. It was the Halvern Meridian Code of Conduct, page 4. Our commitment to a diverse and inclusive environment. "You are correct, Ms. Kincaid," I said to Sable, my voice barely above a whisper, but it carried in the dead air. "It is about pity. The pity is that you believed the rules were only for people like me." I pointed to the document. "I didn't write this policy. You did." Myra Liu, the General Counsel, picked up the page. Her eyes scanned to the bottom. "This is the corporate resolution against discrimination and harassment," she said to the room. "It's the one we passed last year, the one that carries a mandatory termination clause for violations at the VP level or above." She looked at Alistair. "It's signed," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, "by every member of the executive committee, including Mr. Thorne, and by Mr. Kincaid himself, as the representative of the Kincaid Holdings." I had placed the gun in their hands, but the anti-discrimination policy was the bullet they had manufactured themselves, signed their names to, and proudly put in the chamber, and Sable, with her own poisoned words, had just pulled the trigger for them. The glass wall reflected it all, the signatures, the pale faces, the checkmate. The air in the room was thick with the finality of the signed Code of Conduct page sitting on the table. Marcus was a statue. Alistair Kincaid looked like a man watching his own home burn down. But Sable was not finished. A cornered animal is the most dangerous, and she had one last, desperate lunge left in her. With a shaking hand, she reached into the designer portfolio that sat beside her chair. She fumbled with the clasp, her manicured fingers clumsy with rage. She pulled out a sheaf of printed papers and slammed them down on the granite table. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. "She's not just a liar, she's a thief," Sable shrieked, her voice raw. She shoved the papers towards Robert Holloway. "I found this last week. She's been diverting company funds, a secret scholarship she's been running on the side. This whole thing, this entire righteous act, is a smokescreen to cover her own crimes." Holloway picked up the top page. It was a printout of an email, clearly from Sable to herself, with another email forwarded below it. The subject line was FWD, donation confirmation, table for Foster. My heart didn't even flutter. This was the move of a chess player who has just realized they're in checkmate and decides to flip the board over. It's messy, it's loud, but it doesn't change the outcome of the game. I had anticipated this. Sable was predictable in her malice. If she couldn't attack my competence, she would attack my integrity. "This is a serious allegation, Ms. Kincaid," the CFO said, looking at me for the first time with a flicker of doubt. I didn't look at him. I looked at Holloway. "The allegation is false," I said, my voice calm and measured. "And it is easily disproven. I would ask that you call a senior technician from IT to this room immediately. They can verify the domain registration and server logs for the scholarship in question." Holloway nodded to the General Counsel, who spoke quietly into the room's intercom. "Send Chen from Digital Forensics to the summit room, now." While we waited, Sable pressed her attack. It's a website, tableforfoster.org. She uses it to solicit donations. How do we know she's not leveraging Halvern's name? Funneling vendor donations for favorable contract terms? The door opened and a young man in a company polo shirt entered, carrying a ruggedized laptop. He looked nervous to be in a room with this much corporate firepower. Mr. Chen, Myra Liu said, we need you to conduct a real-time domain and network audit. The domain is tableforfoster.org. Is it hosted on company servers? Is it registered through any corporate account? Is there any financial or network traffic link between this domain and Halvern Meridian? The technician's fingers flew across his keyboard. Lines of code scrolled across his screen. The room was silent for a full 30 seconds. The only sound the soft clicking of the keys. Okay, he said finally, looking up. I can confirm the domain tableforfoster.org is privately registered. The owner is listed as Rhea Kincaid. It's hosted on a third-party commercial server with no connection to the Halvern network. The site has a basic SSL certificate, also privately paid for. There are no inbound or outbound traffic links to any Halvern Meridian IP address. It's a completely separate, personal entity. Thank you, Mr. Chen. That will be all, Holloway said. As the IT tech scurried out, I reached back into my satchel. I placed 2 more documents on the table. The first was a certified copy of my personal bank statement from the last 12 months. Highlighted in yellow was a recurring monthly transfer of $200 from my checking account to the scholarship fund. The second was the official incorporation document for Table for Foster, registered as a 501c3 nonprofit, founded by me 2 years ago with my own savings. As you can see, I said, the scholarship is real, and it is funded by a small portion of my personal salary. It gives grants to foster kids aging out of the system to help them buy textbooks for college. It has never, not once, received $1 of corporate money. The CFO took the documents, his eyes scanning them quickly. He looked up at Holloway and gave a single, sharp shake of his head. The financials are clean. There's no link. The accusation is baseless. The air went out of Sable. Her final desperate gambit had not just failed, it had backfired, painting her as not just a fraud and a bully, but as someone malicious enough to attack a charity for foster children to save herself. She set me up, Sable hissed, the words small and venomous, all the theatrical rage gone, replaced by the pure, distilled poison of defeat. Robert Holloway looked at her, his face a mask of stone, and in the quietest voice I had ever heard him use, he delivered the killing blow. She didn't set you up, Ms. Kincaid. She documented you. Jess Lee, the head of HR, chose that moment to slide another file onto the table. In light of this baseless and retaliatory accusation, she said, and the verified audio evidence of harassment, HR is officially reopening a previous informal complaint filed by Rhea. She looked at Marcus. A complaint from 6 months ago regarding Ms. Kincaid's unprofessional and exclusionary language in a team meeting. You dismissed it at the time. Mr. Thorne, citing Rhea's negative tone. Marcus sank lower in his chair. It was a domino cascade of his own bad faith. Myra Liu, the general counsel, looked from Marcus to Sable, her expression one of profound disappointment. There is also the matter of financial restitution, she stated, her voice crisp and final. Under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act and our own corporate bylaws, when financial malfeasance is proven, the company is entitled to a clawback of any incentive-based compensation paid during the period of the wrongdoing. That would include all quarterly bonuses paid to both Mr. Thorne and Ms. Kincaid for the last fiscal year. She let that sink in. Not only would they be fired, but they would have to write a massive check back to the company they had stolen from. Marcus, finally understanding the true depth of his ruin, made one last, pathetic appeal. He looked to Alistair, his old friend. Alistair, please, he stammered. This is a family matter. We can handle this. A misunderstanding between the girls. Myra Liu didn't even let Alistair answer. Her head snapped toward Marcus, her eyes flashing. "This is not a family matter, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice ringing with the absolute authority of the law. "This is corporate wrongdoing." The revolving door had stopped. The music was over. The family that wasn't a family had finally been served with a bill they couldn't push onto someone else, and it was a debt they would be paying for a very, very long time. At 3:55 p.m. on Monday, the entire company received a calendar invitation from the Office of the General Counsel. The subject was 3 words: mandatory all-hands meeting. The location: the Grand Atrium. No other context was given. By 4 p.m., the atrium was a sea of confusion and anxiety. This was not a space for collaboration. It was a Roman forum, all polished granite and 3-story glass walls. Hundreds of employees stood in nervous clusters, their whispers echoing in the cavernous space. This was where CEOs were introduced, or where massive layoffs were announced. The air was electric with dread. I was not in the crowd. I stood to the side, near the low-set podium, beside Jess Lee from HR. Myra Liu, the general counsel, was on the other side. We were the pillars of the execution. I was wearing the same simple black blazer I had worn in the summit room that morning. I felt no nerves, only a profound, cold stillness. I was not here as a participant. I was here as a fact-checker. The massive, wall-sized LED screen at the front of the atrium, usually reserved for stock tickers and cheerful corporate branding, flickered to life. It displayed a single, stark white slide with a title in the corporate blue font: How Policy Protects Us. Robert Holloway, the audit chair, walked onto the podium. He gripped the lectern, his face severe. He did not say hello. "This afternoon," his voice boomed, amplified by the atrium's speakers, "the board's audit committee concluded an emergency investigation into gross violations of corporate policy. This is not a discussion. This is a debriefing." A collective, nervous cough rippled through the crowd. Holloway clicked a remote. The screen changed. The first image was the $2,937 receipt from Rook and Finch, blown up to the size of a billboard, the gold foil numbers, the scrawled signatures of Marcus and Sable, were visible from the back row. A wave of murmurs started. People knew that restaurant. They knew those signatures. They knew that price. "This expense report was filed on Friday night," Holloway stated. "It was filed as client entertainment, as has already been verified. No client was present." He clicked again. The screen cut to a sterile, text-based slide showing the exact wording of Rule 802.1 and Scene. Policy 802.17. High-value entertainment expenses filed without client substantiation are subject to immediate, non-standard review by the audit committee. The crowd was restless. This was dry, boring. They didn't understand. "The policy is the rule," Holloway said, "but the violation was a theft of corporate assets." Click. The screen changed to a map of the city. A bright red line animated its path, starting from a dot labeled Rook and Finch and snaking its way uptown, coming to a permanent stop at a luxury building labeled Halcyon Key Residences. "This," Holloway's voice dropped, "is the GPS-tracked path of a $2,000 bottle of wine, purchased with your money, and taken to a private home for personal consumption." The murmuring stopped. This was no longer about policy. This was a heist movie. "The financial malfeasance," Holloway continued, "is grounds for termination, but the investigation also uncovered a severe violation of our code of conduct." Jess Lee stepped forward. "As part of the evidence package," she said, her voice clear and strong, "we recovered audio from the dinner. It is relevant to the termination for cause of the individuals involved." A digital audio file appeared on the screen. The play button was pressed. The atrium, with its acoustics designed for symphonies, was suddenly filled with the intimate, venomous whisper of Sable Kincaid. "This table's not for foster beggars." The silence that followed was a physical blow. It was a vacuum, a sudden, horrifying absence of sound. I saw hundreds of faces, All turned toward the screen, their mouths open. A young woman in the front row brought her hand up to cover her mouth, her eyes wide. The whispers that returned were no longer murmurs. They were sharp, electric hisses of shock and disgust. In that moment, every eye in the room seemed to find me. Standing by the podium, they recognized the target of the slur. I did not move. I did not react. I simply stared at the audio file on the screen. My humiliation had been made public, but it was no longer my own. It was a corporate exhibit. It was Exhibit B. Holloway stepped back to the lectern. The employees involved in the financial fraud and the workplace harassment are Marcus Thorne and Sable Kincaid. He didn't need to say more. The crowd's reaction was a low, angry growl. Effective immediately, Holloway declared. Mr. Thorne and Ms. Kincaid have been suspended indefinitely, pending the conclusion of a formal, external investigation. Furthermore, as this investigation has revealed systemic vulnerabilities in our expense reporting, all corporate travel and entertainment cards, company-wide, are frozen. That was the move. The crowd erupted. It wasn't just about Sable anymore. It was about their canceled trips, their client dinners, their inconvenience. The rot in the executive suite had just poisoned the well for everyone. Now wait just a moment, a voice cut through the chaos. Alistair Kincaid, who had been standing in the executive viewing balcony, was now striding onto the atrium floor. He wasn't on the schedule. He held up his hand, as if to calm a restless student body. "Bob," he said, trying to project calm authority, "I believe we can handle this internally. This is a family firm. This public display is not necessary." He was trying to put the monster back in the box. He was trying to reassert the old rules. Before Holloway could respond, a new voice, crisp and amplified, came from the podium. A woman I didn't know, elegant and severe, had stepped up to the microphone beside him. I recognized her from the board directory. Elena Sandoval, the new independent director, the one brought in after the last shareholder revolt. She looked directly at Alistair Kincaid. "Mr. Kincaid," she said, her voice resonating with a steel he had fatally misjudged. "I am also a former foster youth." The atrium went completely silent. "What I just heard on that audio," she continued, "was not a private matter. It was a cancer, and internally, Mr. Kincaid, is how this cancer was allowed to fester. Internally is how Ms. Kincaid's prior complaints were dismissed. The time for internal discretion is over. The time for transparency is now." It was an execution. She had just invalidated his entire dynasty in 3 sentences. Alistair stood frozen, his hand still half raised, a relic in his own forum. Holloway clicked the remote one last time. The screen changed to a final, stark slide. It was a quote from the company's anti-retaliation policy. Halvern Meridian has a zero-tolerance policy for any form of retaliation against an employee who, in good faith, reports a violation of the code of conduct, and beneath it, magnified, were the digital signatures of every executive, of every board member. Alistair Kincaid's was first on the list. It was a shield. It was a public promise. And then, a sound I had never heard before at Halvern Meridian. Someone in the back clapped. It was a single, sharp sound, then another, then a dozen. It wasn't a standing ovation. It wasn't a cheer. It was a ripple of slow, deliberate, building applause. They weren't clapping for me. I was just the catalyst. They were clapping for the policy. They were clapping because, for the first time, the rules they were forced to live by had finally, brutally, been applied to the people who wrote them. The policy, my policy, finally had teeth. The applause washed over the atrium. The meeting was over. People began to move, talking in excited, furious clusters, glancing at me with a new, strange mixture of fear and awe. I didn't speak to any of them. I just stood by the stage as the crowd dispersed. I took one deep breath. The air felt clean. The weight I had carried in my shoulders for a decade. The invisible, crushing weight of being the charity case, of having to be twice as good just to be seen as equal. of swallowing 1,000 tiny slights. It was gone. It didn't just lift, it dissolved. The tensed-up armor I had lived inside for my entire adult life had just fallen away. I felt light. I felt, for the first time, not like a guest, but like I belonged. Justice, I have learned, is not a clap of thunder. It is the quiet, methodical clicking of a well-oiled machine. It is the sound of a ledger being balanced, of a debt being paid, of a system correcting itself. In the days that followed the all-hands meeting, the reckoning at Halvern Meridian was not loud or emotional. It was a series of transactions, cold, precise, and beautiful in their finality. The first transaction was the clawback. The General Counsel's office moved with surgical speed. There was no negotiation. An external auditor verified my log of the past 5 fraudulent dinners, totaling 11,440 buys. The board, citing a clause in the executive compensation agreement regarding conduct resulting in significant reputational or financial harm, invoked a punitive multiplier. It was not enough to simply return the money they stole. The penalty was set at 4 times the amount of the proven fraudulent expenses. Marcus Thorne and Sable Kincaid were each presented with a legally binding demand for the repayment of their last 2 quarterly bonuses, a sum totaling well over $250,000. It was a life-altering amount of money, a debt that would follow them for years. It was not a fine. It was, in the sterile language of the legal notice, a compensation realignment. Their wealth, built on a foundation of lies, was being systematically dismantled. The second transaction was smaller, but more symbolic. I received an automated notification from the finance department, from finsysalert@halvernmeridian.com. Subject, notification, expense credit, ECID 904B. Body, a full credit in the amount of $2,900.37. Has been applied to your corporate account. The original expense has been voided and recategorized. Note, restitution under 802.1 investigation. The money from the Rook and Finch dinner was returned, not with an apology, but with a case number. It was a quiet, digital correction. The debt was erased from the books. The third transaction reached beyond the company walls. My documentation had included Sable's boastful comments at dinner about her side hustle, a consulting gig with one of our smaller marketing vendors. The audit committee, now in a state of hypervigilance, immediately flagged it. An inquiry revealed that Sable had an undeclared personal consulting contract with the vendor, a firm that had seen its business with Halvern Meridian triple since Marcus Thorne became their division head. It was a classic kickback scheme, dressed up as consulting. Within 48 hours, the vendor's master services agreement with Halvern was terminated, and Sable's lucrative side channel of income vanished. The fourth transaction was systemic. Jess Lee from HR, now armed with the full backing of the board and the irrefutable evidence of Sable's harassment, pushed through a proposal she had been trying to get approved for years, a new, mandatory, company-wide training program on unconscious bias, workplace safety, and exclusionary language was made a condition of continued employment for all staff, from the mailroom to the C-suite. And in a moment of poetic, perfect justice, she announced that the training would not be conducted by a standard corporate consulting firm. It would be designed and delivered by a national nonprofit organization run by and for foster care alumni. They would be paid to come into our offices and teach us about the power of our words. Then came the meeting that was supposed to be about me. Robert Holloway, Myra Liu, and Elena Sandoval, the new board member, called me to the summit room. There were no documents on the table this time. "Rhea," Holloway began, his voice lacking its previous prosecutorial edge. "The board has been impressed, not just with your diligence, but with your fortitude. We have a problem here, a cultural one. We need someone to fix it. We are creating a new role, a position that reports directly to the General Counsel and the board. Director of Ethics Enablement. It's yours, if you want it." Director of Ethics Enablement. It was a title. It was power. It was a seat at the table they had once denied me. The old Rhea, the one who lived in the shadow of the Kincaid name, would have accepted with quiet gratitude, but I was not that person anymore. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. "I accept, but I have one condition." I looked at all three of them. Sable Kincaid was correct about one thing. I do run a scholarship called Table for Foster. It's a small, private fund. I want to bring it inside the company. I want Halvern Meridian to officially sponsor a Table for Foster corporate scholarship, an endowed fund for foster youth pursuing careers in business and technology. I leaned forward. And I want its initial seed money to be the exact sum clawed back from Mr. Thorne and Ms. Kincaid under the punitive multiplier. I was not asking them to donate. I was telling them to redirect the restitution. I was demanding that the money stolen through corruption and arrogance be used to build a ladder for the very people they scorned. Elena Sandoval smiled, a slow, brilliant smile. Myra Liu and Robert Holloway exchanged a look. There was no debate. "Approved," Holloway said. "Send my office the account details. The transfer will be made by the end of the week." It was that simple. An entire corporate foundation, created in a sentence, on my laptop. I pulled up the donation portal for my small nonprofit. I projected it onto the main screen in the room. I typed in the routing numbers for a new investment account. The money that had paid for Wagyu and rare wine would now pay for tuition and textbooks. My work wasn't finished. That evening, I filed one last request with the finance department. The audit of Marcus and Sable's expenses had revealed they had accumulated over 2 million air miles on their corporate cards through their fraudulent client dinners. They had planned to use them for a first-class trip to Europe. I drafted a memo, citing a clause about corporate assets, and had those 2 million miles transferred. They were moved from the personal accounts of Thorne and Kincaid and placed into a newly created Internship Opportunity Travel Fund, designed to fly interns from underprivileged backgrounds to our corporate headquarters for mentorship weeks. The ripples continued to spread. The wine vendor, their reputation tarnished by their association with the scandal, issued a public letter of apology. They announced they were implementing a new, fully transparent tracking system for all high-value corporate allocations and were making a sizable donation to the National Foster Parent Association. They had been complicit in the culture of excess, and now they were paying their penance. I sat in my office late that night, long after everyone else had gone home. On my screen was the confirmation of the wire transfer, the full sum from the clawback, a staggering amount of money, now sitting in the scholarship's investment account. The money had come full circle. It had been taken from the company under a false pretense of exclusion, a dinner at a table where some, like me, were deemed unworthy. It had been used to fuel a sense of superiority, to draw a line between the powerful and the beggars. Now, that same money was back where it belonged, not just in the company's coffers, but in a place of purpose. It was now a tool for inclusion. It was a fund that declared, with the full backing of the Halvern Meridian Corporation, that the table was open to everyone, especially those who had to fight the hardest for a seat. The money had returned to its proper place, the place where a single cruel phrase once tried to make someone at the far end of the table bow their head in shame. I didn't stay for the aftermath. I didn't need the congratulations or the fearful sideways glances in the hallway. My work was not in the atrium. It was in the silent, empty spaces where decisions are recorded and consequences are processed. I took the elevator back up to the 40th floor. The summit room, the site of the morning's execution, was empty now, but the ghost of the tension still hung in the air. A cleaning crew had already wiped down the granite table, but I could still see the faint outlines where the documents had lain, where Sable had slammed down her useless counter-accusation. The glass walls reflected 100 versions of me, a solitary figure in a room built for power. I sat down not at the head of the table, but at the side, where I had sat that morning. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, its cool blue light pushing back against the encroaching evening shadows. I logged into the newly created portal for the Table for Foster corporate scholarship. The balance, a number so large it seemed unreal, was displayed at the top. The money from the clawback had already been transferred. It was an enormous sum, a war chest for a battle I was just beginning. But a foundation is not built with a single transfer. It is built with intent. My first act as the unofficial administrator of this new fund had to be symbolic. It had to be precise. I clicked on Make a Grant. A form appeared. In the field for grant recipient, I typed the name of a small community college in the city's poorest borough. In the field for grant purpose, I wrote Textbook and Supplies Fund for first-year students from foster care. And in the field for grant amount, I typed a number I knew by heart, $2,937, the exact cost of the dinner, the price of their arrogance, the bill they had pushed across the table at me. This was the first withdrawal. This was the money returning to the world, not as a tool of exclusion, but as an instrument of opportunity. I clicked Confirm Transfer. A green checkmark appeared on the screen. The transaction was complete. At that exact moment, my phone, sitting face down on the table, vibrated. It was a soft, single buzz. I turned it over. It was an automated notification, a carbon copy of an email sent from the General Counsel's office to Thorne, Marcus, Kincaid, Sable. From Liu, Myra, General Counsel. Subject: Termination of employment. For cause body. This email serves as official notification that your employment with Halvern Meridian is terminated, effective immediately, for cause, pursuant to the findings of the board's audit committee and violations of the corporate code of conduct. Further details regarding the settlement of your final compensation and the clawback of previously awarded bonuses will be provided by our external legal counsel. There was no, "We wish you the best," no flowery language, no corporate doublespeak. It was as cold and clean as a guillotine. I closed the notification. I felt a sense of finality, but not joy. It was the quiet satisfaction of a long, complex equation that had finally been solved. I opened my messaging app and selected the CFO's name. I typed one sentence. Policy works when we let it. I hit send. There was no need for anything more. He would understand. This was never about me. It was about the integrity of the system. I stood up and walked to the room's vast glass wall. The city was a glittering tapestry of light below. The sun had set, and the sky was a deep, bruised purple. Down on the street, 4 blocks away, I could see the warm, golden glow of a restaurant, Rook and Finch. Its tables, even from this distance, looked like polished mirrors, reflecting the light of the expensive chandeliers, ready for the next round of powerful people to feast on their own importance. The cycle would continue, but now, there was a crack in the mirror. There was a rule with teeth. I walked back to the table. I took a screenshot of the transfer confirmation, the $2,937 grant I had just made. The file appeared on my desktop. I renamed it, Enjoy the Check, PNG. I saved it to the secure drive where I kept all my evidence. It was the final file in the case. Then, I closed my laptop. I didn't put it in my bag. I reached into my satchel and pulled out one last thing, a high-quality, color copy of the Rook and Finch receipt, the one with their signatures. I placed it in the center of the vast, empty table, right where Sable had slammed down her papers that morning. There was no note, no grand speech, no moral lesson. The numbers and the silence were indictment enough. I turned and walked to the door. Switching off the lights as I left, the room plunged into darkness, save for the city lights reflecting in the glass. In the center of the dark table, the white slip of paper seemed to glow, a final, damning piece of evidence left at the scene of the crime. I walked down the empty, carpeted hallway. The only sound was the soft click of my heels. The elevator at the end of the hall arrived with a quiet, polite ding. The sound was a single, short note, a brief pause, like a heartbeat steadying itself after a long, desperate race. The polished steel doors slid open. I stepped inside. There was no fanfare, no ceremony, no epilogue. The doors slid closed. The story ended the moment justice was deposited into the account. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you are tuning in from, so please comment below to connect and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and show your support by hitting the hype button. It helps this story get heard by more people.